Sometimes the cruelest lies we tell ourselves become the truths we live by. High in the Montana wilderness, where cell towers fear to climb and civilization feels like a distant memory, Elena Vasquez has made peace with solitude. Her weathered hands can field dress a deer in 20 minutes. Her keen eyes can track a wounded elk through fresh powder. But her heart, that stubborn organ, refuses to accept what 3 different doctors told her 15 years ago. The cabin creaks under another February snowfall as she watches headlights pierce the darkness below, weaving drunkenly through the pines before disappearing entirely. Most folks who venture up her mountain are lost, but something about the silence that follows makes her grab her rifle and her first aid kit. She's saved plenty of foolish city dwellers over the years, but she's never saved one who would look at her broken body and see something worth fixing. Elena doesn't know that the man bleeding in the overturned sedan below carries in his medical bag the power to rewrite her entire story, or that his arrival will force her to choose between the safe grief she's cultivated and a love that demands she risk everything again. Can a woman who's spent 7 years hiding from the world find the courage to step back into the light? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind carries no sound from the wreckage below, and that silence settles into Elena's bones like cold. She's learned to read the mountain's moods over 7 winters, the difference between a tourist's fender bender and something that demands action. This feels like the latter. She pulls on her heavy boots, the leather cracked but still waterproof, and checks the rifle's chamber out of habit. The first aid kit goes into her pack alongside emergency flares and a thermos of coffee that's been brewing since dawn. Outside, the February air bites at her exposed skin with teeth sharp enough to numb flesh in minutes. Fresh snow crunches under her feet as she starts down the narrow trail she's worn between the pines, her headlamp cutting a thin wedge through the darkness. The descent takes 20 minutes of careful navigation around ice-slicked rocks and fallen branches. Elena moves with the sure-footed grace of someone who's made this mountain home, but her pulse quickens as the smell of antifreeze and hot metal grows stronger. When she finally reaches the overturned sedan, its undercarriage gleaming wet in her light, she can hear him breathing. "Sir, can you hear me?" Her voice carries the authority of someone who's pulled injured hikers from ravines and talked panicked hunters through setting their own broken bones over radio static. A groan from inside the vehicle, then movement. The driver's side window has spider-webbed but not shattered completely. Elena crouches beside it, angling her light to peer inside. A man in his 30s, Asian features, expensive-looking winter coat, now torn across one shoulder. Blood trickles from a cut on his forehead, but his eyes track her movement when she taps the glass. "My car hit ice," he says, words slightly slurred but coherent. I think I'm okay." Elena has heard that particular brand of shock-induced optimism before. Let me be the judge of that. "Can you move your fingers, your toes?" He demonstrates both with the methodical care of someone accustomed to physical assessments. Medical training, maybe, or at least familiarity with injury protocols. The car's position makes extraction tricky. Passenger side pinned against a boulder, driver's side facing skyward like a turtle flipped on its shell. "What's your name?" Elena asks, already mentally cataloguing the tools she'll need from her cabin. "Michael. Dr. Michael Chen." He pauses, probably expecting the title to carry weight up here where her nearest neighbor lives 12 miles away, and the closest hospital might as well be on Mars. "I was trying to reach the ranger station before the storm hit." Elena almost laughs. The ranger station closed for the season 3 months ago, a fact that any reasonable research would have uncovered. But city people rarely think to ask reasonable questions before venturing into country that doesn't forgive ignorance. "Well, Dr. Chen, the good news is I can get you out of there. The bad news is you're spending the night on my mountain whether you like it or not." She stands, brushing snow from her knees. "This storm's going to dump another foot before dawn, and these roads won't be passable until the county plows come through. If we're lucky, that'll be sometime next week." She watches his face process this information, Seize the moment when the reality of his situation truly hits. Most people panic at this point, start making demands about cell phone signals and emergency services that exist only in their urban imagination. But Dr. Chen simply nods. "What do you need me to do?" The question surprises her. In 7 years of mountain rescues, she's pulled out exactly 3 people who didn't immediately try to negotiate with the wilderness as if it were a customer service representative. This makes 4. "Stay still while I get some equipment. I'll be back in 40 minutes. Elena turns to go, then stops. "Doctor, that medical bag I saw in your back seat. Anything in there that can't freeze?" "Insulin," he says immediately, "and some cardiac medications that need to stay temperature controlled." She nods and continues up the trail, but his answer lodges in her mind like a splinter. Insulin suggests diabetes, but he'd moved with steady coordination and shown no signs of hypoglycemia. The cardiac medications could be personal or professional supplies. Either way, a stranded doctor with a medical bag represents a complication she hadn't anticipated. Back at her cabin, Elena gathers rope, pulleys, and a portable winch she's used for hauling deer carcasses. The familiar routine of rescue preparation usually calms her, but tonight feels different. Maybe it's the way Dr. Chen had assessed his own condition with clinical detachment, or how he'd asked what he could do, rather than demanding what she would do for him. Most of the lost souls who find their way to her mountain arrive as problems to be solved. This one might actually be useful. She hefts the equipment pack and heads back into the storm, unaware that the man waiting in the overturned car below carries more than medical supplies in his bag, unaware that his presence on her mountain isn't the accident it appears to be. The rescue takes 2 hours and leaves Elena's shoulders burning from the strain of working the winch system in sub-zero wind. Dr. Chen proves surprisingly useful, following her instructions without the usual city-dweller panic when she demonstrates how to brace himself during the extraction. When the car door finally groans open and she helps him climb out, he moves with only a slight favor to his left side, bruised ribs most likely, but nothing that won't heal. "Your medical bag," she says, handing him the leather case she'd retrieved from the wreckage. "Everything else can wait until the road's clear." He accepts it with careful hands, and she notices how he checks the latches immediately. Whatever's inside matters to him. The insulin, probably, though something about his explanation earlier still doesn't sit right. She's seen enough diabetics in her 7 years of wilderness guiding to recognize the telltale signs of careful blood sugar management. Dr. Chen shows none of them. The hike back to her cabin tests his stamina more than the car extraction. Elena sets a steady pace, not the punishing march she'd use for an emergency evacuation, but not the tourist stroll most visitors need. He keeps up without complaint, though she can hear his breathing grow labored in the thin air. Boston's sea level, she guesses. His expensive winter gear might look impressive in an outdoor equipment catalog, but it's designed for appearances rather than function. By the time they reach her porch, ice has formed in his beard, and his lips show the blue tinge that precedes hypothermia. "Inside," she orders, holding the door open. "Strip out of those wet clothes while I get the fire built up." Her cabin reflects 7 years of practical solitude. One main room with a stone fireplace, kitchen area defined by counters she built herself, and a sleeping loft accessible by ladder. Everything serves a purpose. The herb drying racks suspended from the ceiling, the gun cabinet beside the door, the ham radio on a corner table surrounded by NOAA weather charts. No decorative touches soften the utilitarian efficiency. No photographs suggest connections to a world beyond these walls. Elena feeds split pine to the fire, while Dr. Chen changes into spare thermal underwear from her emergency supplies. The clothes hang loose on his frame. She's taller than most women, broader through the shoulders from years of physical labor. When he emerges from the small bathroom, the incongruity almost makes her smile. A Boston cardiologist wearing her long johns and thick wool socks, standing in a cabin that hasn't seen indoor plumbing or electric lighting since she moved here in 1980. "Coffee?" she asks, though it's not really a question. Hot liquids are medical necessity at this point, not hospitality. "Please." He settles onto her couch, a sturdy piece she'd found abandoned at a ranger station and repaired with leather patches. Thank you. For everything. I realize you didn't have to. Yes, I did. Elena cuts him off. Mountain has rules. You don't leave people to die when you can prevent it. She pours coffee from the pot that's rarely empty, adding honey from her own hives and a splash of whiskey that serves as both antiseptic and warming agent. The routine soothes her more than it should. 7 years of self-imposed isolation have made her forget the simple pleasure of caring for another person, of having someone to offer shelter and warmth. How long have you lived here? Dr. Chen asks, accepting the mug with hands that have steadied since getting warm. Long enough to know better than to drive mountain roads in a storm. She settles into her rocking chair, the only other seating the room offers. What brought you up here anyway? Real reason, not the ranger station story. Something flickers across his expression. Calculation, maybe, or careful consideration of what truth to share. Research, he says finally. Medical research. I'm looking into treatment patterns in rural communities, particularly regarding reproductive health services from the 1960s and 70s. Elena's coffee turns bitter in her mouth. Reproductive health. The words carry weight she doesn't want to examine, dredging up memories she's spent years burying under physical exhaustion and deliberate isolation. She knows what those decades brought to women like her. Procedures performed without proper explanation, consent forms signed in languages they couldn't read. Doctors who promised solutions and delivered permanent damage instead. A lot of that research could be done from Boston, she says carefully. Some of it. But medical records only tell part of the story. I'm trying to track outcomes for patients who receive treatment from specific practitioners. He pauses, studying her face with the intensity of someone trained to read subtle signs of distress. Women who might have been told they couldn't have children when that wasn't necessarily true. The fire pops, sending sparks up the chimney, and Elena uses the moment to steady herself. This is what she gets for breaking her own rules, for bringing strangers into her sanctuary. Even accidental visitors carry complications she's not prepared to handle. Outside, the storm continues its assault on the mountain, sealing them together in this small space where past and present threaten to collide. Elena sets her coffee mug on the hearth with deliberate precision, buying herself seconds to process what feels like a punch to the sternum. The ceramic makes a small clink against the stone, unnaturally loud in the sudden tension that's filled her cabin like smoke. You picked an interesting mountain for that kind of research, she says, standing to add another log to the fire, though it doesn't need one. Physical motion helps her think, keeps her hands busy while her mind races through implications she doesn't want to face. Dr. Chen, Michael, watches her move with that same clinical intensity she'd noticed earlier. Not as random as it might seem. I have reason to believe a particular surgeon worked in this region during the early 1970s. Dr. James Chen. The surname registers like a bell tolling. Elena's hands still on the fire poker, and she feels something cold crawl up her spine that has nothing to do with the February wind rattling her windows. Chen. Related to you? My father. The words come out flat, professionally neutral, but Elena catches the tightness around his eyes. Whatever Dr. Michael Chen is looking for up here, it's personal in ways that medical research doesn't usually encompass. She turns from the fire, studying his face in the flickering light. The expensive clothes, the careful way he'd checked his medical bag, the fact that he'd been driving mountain roads in a storm to reach a ranger station he should have known was closed, none of it adds up to coincidence anymore. Your father. Elena repeats the words slowly, testing their weight. And you think he performed procedures on women in this area? What kind of procedures? Michael sets down his coffee and leans forward, elbows on knees. The thermal underwear makes him look younger somehow, less like the polished professional who'd introduced himself as doctor, and more like a man carrying burdens that keep him awake at night. Sterilizations, primarily. Sometimes presented as other treatments, cyst removals, minor surgeries to correct irregularities. The women weren't always told the full scope of what was being done. His voice carries the careful cadence of someone who's practiced this explanation, refined it through multiple tellings. I've been tracking his patient records for 18 months. The trail led here. The room feels smaller suddenly, the walls pressing closer as Elena realizes why this stranger's presence in her sanctuary feels so invasive. It's not random. It's not accident. Somehow, impossibly, the past she's spent 7 years hiding from has found her anyway, walked right up to her door wearing thermal underwear and carrying a medical bag. 18 months, she says, settling back into her rocking chair but remaining rigid, ready to move. That's a long time to spend chasing old medical records. Some things take time to uncover, especially when people worked very hard to hide them. Michael's gaze doesn't waver from her face. Elena, when you said you know what those decades brought to women, you weren't speaking generally, were you? The question hangs between them like a blade. Outside, the storm has intensified, wind howling through the pines with a sound like voices crying out. Elena listens to it while she weighs her options, all of which feel like stepping off cliffs into darkness. She could lie. Claim she was speaking from general knowledge, from stories heard secondhand. Send him back to his research trail with nothing more than the coffee and shelter mountain hospitality demands. When the road's clear, he'll leave, and her isolation will close around her again like healing skin over a wound. Or she could tell him why she really knows about those decades. About the clinic in Kalispell, where she'd gone as a frightened 16-year-old, bleeding and in pain. About the doctor who'd promised a simple procedure to fix what was wrong, who'd spoken with calm authority about necessary interventions and minor corrections, about waking up with stitches she hadn't expected, and a sense of hollow emptiness that went deeper than physical healing. You came here looking for me specifically, she says instead. And it's not a question. The car accident, the storm, convenient timing for someone who needed an excuse to end up at my cabin. Michael has the grace not to deny it immediately. The storm is real. The accident is real. I'm not that good an actor. But you're right. I've been trying to find you for months. Elena Vasquez, treated at Glacier Valley Medical Clinic in August 1969. Hearing her name spoken aloud in connection with that place, that time, feels like being struck by lightning. Elena grips the arms of her rocking chair hard enough that her knuckles go white. 7 years of carefully constructed isolation. 7 years of burying that frightened girl under layers of wilderness competence and deliberate solitude, and it all crumbles in the space of a sentence. What do you want? The words come out rougher than she intends, carrying more pain than she's allowed herself to acknowledge in years. Michael meets her eyes steadily. I want to tell you that everything my father told you that day was a lie. The words hit Elena like a physical blow, stealing her breath as completely as if she'd fallen through ice into the lake below. She releases the chair arms and presses her palms flat against her thighs, trying to anchor herself to something solid while the room seems to tilt around her. Lies. The word comes out as barely a whisper. She clears her throat and tries again. What lies? But even as she asks, part of her already knows she doesn't want the answer. 18 years of carrying the truth of her brokenness. 18 years of building her identity around what she cannot do, cannot give, cannot be, and this stranger wants to reach into that carefully constructed foundation and tear it apart with promises that sound too impossible to believe. Don't. Elena stands abruptly, the rocking chair banging against the wall behind her. Don't you dare come into my home and tell me stories about what might have been. I was there. I know what happened to me. Do you? Michael's voice remains maddeningly calm, professional. Do you know that my father was stripped of his medical license in 1973? That the procedures he performed on at least 37 women in this region were medically unnecessary? That he told young women they were damaged when they weren't, convinced them they needed interventions that served no purpose except to ensure they'd never conceive? Elena backs toward the kitchen, putting distance between herself and these words that threaten to reshape everything she's accepted about her life. The familiar space of her cabin feels foreign now, contaminated by possibilities she's trained herself not to consider. Stop talking. Her hands shake as she grips the counter edge. You don't know anything about me. about what was wrong with me before I ever saw your father. Severe menstrual irregularities and abdominal pain, Michael says quietly, and Elena's blood turns to ice water, caused by endometriosis that could have been treated with medication and minor surgical intervention. Instead, you received a complete bilateral salpingectomy, removal of both fallopian tubes, at 16 years old, without proper consent or explanation of alternatives. The clinical terms wash over her like freezing rain. She remembers being told the surgery was necessary, that things inside her were too damaged to repair, that this was the only way to stop the pain and prevent worse problems later. She'd been too young, too frightened, too grateful for the promise of relief to ask the right questions. He kept detailed records, Michael continues, his voice growing harder. Notes about procedures that would prevent future complications in unsuitable candidates for reproduction. His words, not mine. He decided which women deserved the chance to have children and which ones didn't. Elena turns away from him, staring out the kitchen window at the storm that feels less violent than the chaos erupting inside her chest. Why should I believe you? Why should I trust anything you say? Because I have your medical file. Because I've spent 2 years documenting what he did and why he did it. And because, his voice breaks slightly, the professional composure finally cracking. Because I need to know how many women he destroyed before I can figure out how to live with being his son. The raw pain in those words penetrates Elena's defenses more effectively than all his clinical facts. She turns back to face him, seeing for the first time how this search has carved hollows under his eyes, how his hands tremble slightly as he reaches for his medical bag. My entire career has been built on healing, he says, opening the leather case with careful fingers. I became a cardiologist because I wanted to fix hearts, to give people more time with the families they love. And then I found out that my father spent his career ensuring some women would never have families at all. Elena watches him pull out a manila folder, thick with papers that represent fragments of her 16-year-old self. Medical records she'd never seen. Reports written in language she wouldn't have understood, even if she'd been allowed to read them. I don't want to see those. But her voice lacks conviction, and they both know it. I know. Michael sets the folder on the counter between them like an offering. I know this is the last thing you want to confront. But Elena, what if there's still time? What if the damage isn't as complete as he led you to believe? The question hangs in the air like smoke from the fire, acrid and impossible to ignore. Elena stares at the folder, at the evidence of choices made for her by people who believed they knew better than she did about her own body, her own future. Outside, the storm rages with renewed fury, as if nature itself is responding to the upheaval in her small sanctuary. She thinks of the life she's built here, the careful solitude that's kept her safe from hope and disappointment alike. Even if you're right, she whispers, what makes you think I want to know? Michael doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he reaches into the folder and withdraws a single sheet of paper. Not her medical records, but something else. A photograph, black and white, showing a young woman who might be Elena's age now, standing beside a hospital bed where a small child lies sleeping. Because of her, he says simply. Maria Santos. She was 17 when my father operated on her, told her the same things he told you. She spent 23 years believing she was broken. Then last year, she had surgery to remove what she thought was a tumor. His voice grows softer. It wasn't a tumor. It was an ectopic pregnancy that had somehow managed to develop despite everything he'd done to prevent it. Elena's legs give way. She sinks onto one of the kitchen stools, staring at the photograph. The woman's face radiates a joy so fierce it seems to illuminate the entire image. She lost the pregnancy, Michael continues, but the surgeon who operated on her found something else. Enough remaining ovarian tissue to make pregnancy possible, with the right intervention. My father's records claimed he'd removed everything. He lied about that too. The cabin falls silent except for the fire's whisper and the storm's relentless battering. Elena forces herself to breathe, to think past the roaring in her ears that sounds like avalanche or earthquake, or the world ending. You don't understand what you're asking me to do. Her voice comes from somewhere far away, barely recognizable as her own. You want me to hope. After 18 years of not hoping, after building every single day of my life around accepting what I can't have. I know. Michael's hands rest flat on the counter, and Elena notices how steady they are now, how sure. I know it's terrifying. But Elena, what if the life you've built here isn't protection? What if it's prison? The words cut deeper than any scalpel. Elena looks around her cabin, seeing it suddenly through his eyes. The isolation she's called sanctuary. The solitude she's named freedom. The careful emptiness she's maintained because filling it with hope felt too dangerous to survive. I stopped wanting things, she whispers. I stopped dreaming about children, about family, about any future that included loving someone enough to hurt this much. It took me years to stop wanting, Michael, years to make peace with empty. And if that peace is built on lies? Elena's hands shake as she reaches for the folder. Her fingers trace the manila surface, feeling the weight of all those pages. All those decisions made without her knowledge or consent. Inside this folder lies either confirmation of everything she's believed about herself, or the complete destruction of the identity she's spent nearly 2 decades constructing. If I look at these, she says slowly, if I let myself believe what you're telling me, there's no going back. I can't unknow whatever's in here. I can't return to the safety of accepting limitations. No, Michael agrees, you can't. But Elena, you also can't spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been possible. Outside, the storm reaches a crescendo, wind screaming through the pines with enough force to rattle the cabin's solid log walls. But inside, time seems suspended, crystallized around this moment of choice. Elena thinks of Maria Santos's radiant face, of the child in the hospital bed, of possibilities she's trained herself not to imagine. She thinks of her parents, dead now, who'd held her while she sobbed after the surgery, who'd told her she was still whole, still worthy of love. She'd believed them then, before years of rejection and failed relationships taught her that broken women don't get the love that builds families. She thinks of the men who'd walked away when she told them the truth, their careful expressions of understanding that couldn't quite hide their relief, the way they'd reframed her honesty as a gift, knowing early, they said, saved everyone from getting too invested in something that could never work out. Elena opens the folder. The first page is a surgical report dated August 15th, 1969. Her name at the top misspelled, Vasques instead of Vasquez. Below that, procedures listed in cold medical terminology that makes her 16-year-old self seem like a specimen rather than a frightened girl who trusted adults to heal rather than harm her. Bilateral salpingectomy, she reads aloud, and the words taste like metal. Partial oophorectomy. She looks up at Michael. He took part of my ovaries too. More than he claimed. Less than he recorded. Michael moves closer, pointing to specific lines in the report. See this notation here? Extensive endometrial involvement requiring aggressive intervention. But look at this. He flips to another page. The pathology report on the tissue he removed. No signs of disease, no endometriosis, no abnormalities that would have required any surgery at all. Elena's vision blurs. The papers in her hands become hieroglyphs, meaningless marks that somehow hold the power to resurrect the dead parts of her heart. What do I do with this? She whispers. Michael's answer is gentle but uncompromising. You decide who you want to be. The words settle into Elena's bones like winter cold, permanent and transforming. She stares at the medical records scattered across her kitchen counter, evidence of theft so profound it defies comprehension. Not just the theft of her body's wholeness, but the theft of choice itself. The theft of dreams she'd buried before they could fully form. I want to be someone who never learned any of this, she says finally, her voice hollow. I want to be the woman I was an hour ago, before you knocked on my door with your father's sins. But even as she speaks, Elena knows that woman is already gone, dissolved like morning frost under the heat of terrible knowledge. She cannot unknow what fills these pages, cannot unfeel the seismic shift in her understanding of herself, her past, her future that stretches ahead like unmarked wilderness. Michael closes the folder gently. What's your next move? The question assumes she has one. Assumes she's capable of moving at all, when every certainty she's built her life around has just crumbled. Elena pushes away from the counter, pacing to the window where the storm still rages with undiminished fury. The glass reflects her face back at her, pale and strained, eyes wide with shock that hasn't yet crystallized into plan or purpose. I don't know how to want things anymore, she admits. I don't know how to hope without it destroying me. And maybe that's where we start. Michael's voice follows her across the small space. Not with hope, just with information, with understanding what's actually possible instead of what you were told was impossible. Elena's reflection wavers in the storm-lashed glass. We? I have contacts, specialists who've worked with women in similar situations. His words come carefully, professionally measured. Reproductive endocrinologists who understand the kind of damage my father inflicted and what might be reversible. If you want to explore options. Options. The word feels foreign in her mouth. For 18 years, Elena has lived in a world without options, where medical pronouncements carried the weight of divine decree. She'd built her entire identity around limitation, around making peace with doors that would never open. Dr. Sarah Hoffman at Johns Hopkins, Michael continues. She's pioneered techniques for reconstructive surgery in cases like yours. And Dr. Patricia Nguyen at UCLA. She's had success with ovarian tissue transplantation, even in patients with significant prior damage. Elena turns from the window. You've already researched this. Before you even found me, you knew what doctors I should see. I've researched all of it. Every woman my father hurt, every possible treatment, every specialist who might be able to help. Michael's composure finally cracks completely, raw pain bleeding through his professional calm. I can't bring back the children my father stole from those women. I can't give anyone back the years they lost, but maybe I can give them choices they didn't know they had. The admission hangs between them, heavy with guilt and desperate hope. Elena sees him clearly now. Not just the successful cardiologist seeking to right historical wrongs, but a son drowning in inherited shame, trying to resurrect something decent from the wreckage of his father's legacy. This isn't about me at all, she realizes. This is about you trying to sleep at night. Both things can be true. His honesty is brutal, uncompromising. Yes, I need to know I've done everything possible to help the women he hurt. But Elena, that doesn't make the help any less real. That doesn't make your options any less valid. Outside, the wind shifts, and for the first time since the storm began, Elena hears a slight decrease in its intensity. Still dangerous, still violent, but no longer the world-ending fury that trapped them together in this small space where secrets go to die. If I see these doctors, she says slowly, if I let them examine me and run tests and tell me what might be possible, what happens to the life I've built here? What happens to the woman who made peace with solitude? I don't know. Michael's answer carries no false comfort. Maybe she evolves. Maybe she discovers that making peace and giving up aren't the same thing. Elena walks back to the counter, running her fingers over the closed folder. Inside these pages lies her 16-year-old self, trusting and afraid, believing the adults who promised to heal her. That girl deserves an accounting, deserves to know that her trust was betrayed and her body stolen from her by someone who never had the right to make such decisions. But the woman Elena became, the wilderness guide, who built a sanctuary in the mountains, who learned to find completeness in solitude, she deserves consideration too. The choice to remain unchanged, to let sleeping wounds lie undisturbed. The storm's letting up, she observes, though snow still whips against the windows. Roads might be passable by morning. Probably. Michael makes no move to pack his medical bag, to prepare for departure. But Elena, once you know the truth, running from it becomes harder. Even if you choose not to pursue treatment, you'll know that was a choice instead of an inevitability. Choice. The word echoes in Elena's mind like a prayer in an unknown language, beautiful and terrifying in its foreignness. Elena stares at her reflection in the dark window, watching snow spiral past the glass like temporal fragments, pieces of past and future colliding in the present moment. Choice. The word pulses through her consciousness with each heartbeat, foreign and sharp-edged as broken bone. "I need air," she says abruptly, moving toward the cabin door. Elena, the storm, is letting up. She pulls her heavy coat from its peg, wrapping herself in wool and determination. "I can't think in here. Too small, too close." Michael doesn't argue as she steps onto the covered porch, though she feels his presence behind her, watchful and concerned. The wind still carries teeth, but the earlier violence has subsided into something more familiar, winter asserting its dominance without the apocalyptic fury that had trapped them together with truths too large for her small sanctuary. Elena breathes deeply, letting the cold sear her lungs clean. The forest stretches endlessly before her, unmarked snow gleaming under the half-hidden moon. This wilderness has been her confessor for 7 years, accepting her silence, her solitude, her carefully maintained emptiness without judgment or expectation. Here she learned to be enough for herself. Here she discovered that peace could exist without hope. But now Michael's revelations contaminate even this sacred space. Every tree she looks upon seems to whisper what if. Every familiar landmark reflects possibility back at her like moonlight on water, beautiful, shifting, impossible to grasp. "I was 19 when I learned my father was a monster." Michael's voice comes from behind her, low and careful. Elena doesn't turn around, but she doesn't move away either. Medical school. 2nd year. I was researching reproductive surgery for a presentation when I found his name buried in a lawsuit filing. Malpractice, multiple patients, settlement sealed by court order. His footsteps creak across the porch boards. I spent that entire night in the library, following threads, finding fragments. Enough to know that the man who taught me to value life had spent his career destroying it. Elena's hands tighten on the porch railing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand what choosing knowledge means. What it costs." Michael's breathing forms clouds in the frigid air. I could have stopped researching, could have protected my ignorance, my peace of mind, my ability to practice medicine without carrying the weight of his sins. But once I knew even a piece of the truth, not knowing the rest became impossible. The confession settles between them like fresh snowfall, muffling sound and reshaping the familiar landscape of their conversation. Elena understands now why he came here, why he's spent months tracking down his father's victims. Knowledge is a wound that doesn't heal, it only spreads. "The woman in the photograph," she says. "Maria Santos. Was she the first one you found?" "The last one." Pain roughens his voice. "By the time I located her, I'd already documented dozens of cases. I thought I understood the scope of what he'd done. But Maria, she was pregnant when I knocked on her door. 7 months. She didn't know it was possible until the symptoms became undeniable." Elena's breath catches. "The baby?" "Healthy daughter. Born 3 weeks ago." Michael moves to stand beside her at the railing, their shoulders almost touching. "Maria named her Esperanza. Hope. Hope." The word pierces Elena's defenses like ice through skin, sharp and sudden and impossible to ignore. She sees Maria Santos's radiant face again, imagines her holding a newborn daughter who represents everything doctors said could never exist. The image fractures something fundamental in Elena's chest, the careful scar tissue she's built around her wounded dreams. "I don't know how to be the woman who hopes," she whispers. "I've forgotten the language, the alphabet of possibility." "Then maybe you start smaller," Michael suggests. "Maybe you begin with curiosity instead of hope, with questions instead of dreams." Elena considers this, testing the weight of it. Questions feel safer than hope, more academic, less devastating if the answers disappoint. She could ask what's possible without committing to wanting it, could seek information without surrendering the protection her carefully constructed emptiness provides. "Dr. Hoffman," she says slowly, "the specialist at Johns Hopkins. What exactly would she need to determine?" "Imaging studies, blood work, examination of remaining tissue. Michael's voice shifts into professional mode, but gentler now, as if he's speaking to a wounded animal that might bolt. Non-invasive initially, just diagnostic, to understand what you're working with. Working with. The phrase implies possibility, potential, hope disguised as medical practicality. Elena feels the seductive pull of it, the way hope masquerades as simple information gathering. The storm's intensity continues to ebb, revealing patches of star-scattered sky between the racing clouds. Elena watches the snow settle into patterns that will be gone by morning, reshaped by wind and temperature into something entirely new. "If I made the appointment," she says carefully, "if I allowed the examination, I'd want you there." Michael nods without hesitation. Of course, not as a doctor, as a witness. Elena finally turns to face him, someone who understands what this costs. The wind carries their words away into the darkness, but the promise remains, settling between them like an unbreakable bond. Elena feels the weight of decision crystallizing in her chest, heavy and terrifying and somehow inevitable. The woman who built her life around accepting limitations is already dissolving, replaced by someone she doesn't recognize. Someone willing to walk voluntarily into the fire of possibility. "I need to call her tomorrow," Elena says, and the words taste like copper pennies, like blood from a bitten tongue. "Dr. Hoffman. Before I lose my nerve." Michael's nod is barely visible in the storm-dimmed moonlight. "I'll get you her direct number. She'll want to review your files first, the originals from my father's records. Then we can schedule—" "No." Elena's voice cuts through his careful planning. "If I'm going to do this, I need to do it fast, before the rational part of my brain takes control again and talks me out of it." She turns back toward the cabin door, suddenly unable to bear the vast openness of the wilderness that has sheltered her for so long. Inside, the fire still burns, casting dancing shadows on walls that have witnessed 7 years of carefully maintained solitude. But the sanctuary feels different now, contaminated by knowledge she can't unknow, possibility she can't unfeel. The medical folder waits on her kitchen counter, like an unexploded bomb. Elena approaches it slowly, aware that Michael follows her inside, closes the door against the storm that continues its retreat into memory. Her fingers hover over the manila surface, trembling with something that might be courage or might be desperation. "What if the tests confirm everything he told me?" she whispers. "What if it's all true, the damage too extensive, the procedures irreversible? What if hope is just another cruelty?" Michael's reflection appears in the dark window beside her own. "Then you'll know for certain, instead of living with doubt disguised as acceptance." Elena opens the folder again, staring down at the surgical report that rewrote her future when she was 16 years old. The clinical language seems even colder now, more brutal in its casual theft of her body's wholeness. She reads her own name misspelled at the top, sees herself reduced to a case number, a collection of symptoms that never existed. "He didn't just take my fertility," she realizes, her voice hollow with dawning understanding. "He took my ability to trust my own body. For 18 years I've lived like a stranger in my own skin, convinced it was fundamentally broken." The revelation fractures something deep inside her chest, a pain so sharp it steals her breath. Elena doubles over, hands pressed to her abdomen, where phantom wounds pulse with remembered trauma. The 16-year-old girl she was, trusting, afraid, believing in the kindness of adults, finally has permission to grieve what was stolen from her. Michael's hand finds her shoulder, steady and warm. "Elena," she straightens slowly, wiping tears she didn't realize were falling. "I'm going to call her, Dr. Hoffman. Tonight. Elena. It's after midnight on the East Coast. Then in the morning. First thing." Her voice grows stronger with each word, fed by something that might be rage or might be determination or might be hope wearing a disguise. "I want the earliest appointment she can give me. I want every test, every scan, every possible piece of information about what's left and what might be possible." Michael studies her face in the firelight. "What changed?" "I remembered something." Elena closes the folder carefully, as if sealing away 18 years of lies. I remembered being 16 and wanting children so badly, I used to practice their names. Before the surgery, before the fear, before I learned to call emptiness peace. I remembered wanting. The admission hangs between them like a prayer, fragile and fierce. Elena feels the dangerous stirring of something she thought was dead. Not hope exactly, but curiosity. The desire to know what her body might be capable of if given the chance to heal from wounds inflicted by surgical lies. It might be too late, she says, testing the words against her newfound resolve. The damage might be permanent, irreversible. Dr. Hoffman might confirm everything Dr. Chen told me 18 years ago. She might, Michael agrees. But Elena, what if she doesn't? Outside, the storm's retreat accelerates, wind dropping from a howl to a whisper. Through the windows, Elena can see the sky clearing in patches, stars emerging between the racing clouds like promises written in distant fire. The blizzard that brought Michael to her door is ending, but the avalanche she triggered inside her chest has only begun. Elena moves to her old rotary phone, its black bulk solid and familiar on the kitchen wall. Tomorrow she'll use this relic to make the most important call of her adult life. Tonight she sits beside the dying fire and allows herself to remember the girl who dreamed of children, who chose their names like prayers, who believed in the kindness of healers before learning that some wounds are carved by the very hands meant to make us whole. The dawn comes grey and unforgiving, filtered through clouds that hang like funeral shrouds over the mountains. Elena wakes to silence, the storm's complete absence more jarring than its fury had been. She lies still in her narrow bed, listening to the hollow quiet where wind song should be, and feels the weight of yesterday's revelations settling into her bones like winter cold. The phone call to Dr. Hoffman is scheduled for 9 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Mountain Time. Elena has been awake since 5, her body rejecting sleep in favor of anxious preparation. She rehearsed the conversation in her head dozens of times, practiced explaining her situation with clinical detachment, but every imagined version dissolves into stammering inadequacy when she pictures actually speaking the words aloud. Michael emerges from the couch where he spent the night, hair disheveled, eyes immediately alert. "How are you feeling?" Terrified, Elena answers honestly, then forces herself toward the kitchen. "Coffee, please." She moves through the familiar ritual of brewing coffee on her wood-burning stove, grateful for the mundane task that keeps her hands busy while her mind races. Outside, the world wears fresh snow like a blank page, pristine and unmarked. By evening, when Michael leaves, when the roads are clear and this strange interlude ends, everything will be different. The woman who wakes up tomorrow will know things the woman standing here today cannot imagine. At exactly 7 a.m., Elena approaches the rotary phone with the reverence of someone approaching an altar. The receiver feels impossibly heavy in her trembling hand. Michael sits at her kitchen table, present but unobtrusive, a witness to this moment of free fall. She dials the number he provided, counts the rings, prepares to leave a message with an answering service. Instead, Dr. Hoffman answers personally, her voice crisp and professional despite the early hour. "Dr. Hoffman, this is Elena Vasquez. Dr. Michael Chen gave me your number. I believe you're familiar with cases involving Dr. Harold Chen's surgical practices from the 1980s. A pause. Then, Ms. Vasquez, yes. Dr. Chen contacted me last week about your case. I've reviewed the medical records he forwarded. I'm very sorry for what you've endured." The sympathy in the stranger's voice nearly undoes Elena's carefully constructed composure. She grips the phone tighter, forcing herself to continue. "I'd like to schedule an appointment, the earliest possible. Of course. How soon can you travel to Baltimore? I have an opening this Thursday if—" "Thursday?" Elena's voice cracks. "This Thursday, as in 3 days from now. I understand the timeline is aggressive, but Dr. Chen emphasized the urgency of your case. We want to move quickly while you're ready to pursue this path. While you're ready." The words pierce Elena like ice water. Dr. Hoffman understands what Elena is just beginning to grasp, that courage is temporary, that the window for hope opens and closes without warning, that waiting for a better moment often means waiting forever. Yes, Elena hears herself saying. Thursday. I'll be there. The appointment details blur together. Times, procedures, preparation instructions. Elena scribbles notes on the back of an envelope, her handwriting illegible even to herself. When she finally hangs up, the cabin feels impossibly small, the walls pressing inward with the weight of what she's committed herself to. 3 days, she whispers to Michael, who watches her with careful concern. 3 days and I'll know everything. Elena, we should talk about logistics. Travel arrangements, hotel reservations. No. She cuts him off sharply, then immediately feels guilty for the harshness. I'm sorry, I can't think about practical things right now. If I start planning details, I'll start thinking rationally, and if I start thinking rationally, I'll talk myself out of this. Michael nods, understanding illuminating his features. Then we'll handle logistics later, day by day. But even as he speaks, Elena feels the first tendrils of doubt creeping into her resolve like smoke through cracks in the foundation. 3 days, 72 hours to travel from her mountain sanctuary to a sterile medical center where strangers will examine her body with instruments and eyes, seeking answers that may not exist. 72 hours to transform from a woman who made peace with emptiness into someone willing to gamble that peace for the possibility of wholeness. The morning light strengthens, revealing the storm's aftermath in stark detail. Trees bent and broken by wind that no longer blows. Snow drifted into impossible sculptures that will melt by afternoon. The wilderness that sheltered Elena for 7 years looks different now, temporary somehow, like a stage set waiting to be struck. She realizes with growing horror that she's already begun to leave this place in her mind, already started the process of abandoning the life she built here. The woman who loved solitude, who found completeness in self-sufficiency, who needed no one and nothing beyond these mountains, that woman is dissolving like spring snow, disappearing so gradually Elena doesn't notice until she's gone. What if I can't come back? She whispers, voicing the fear that crystallizes only as she speaks it. What if knowing changes me so completely that I can't live here anymore? Michael has no answer, and his silence confirms Elena's deepest terror. She's about to lose herself entirely in the pursuit of becoming someone she was never meant to be.